I'm McKinney Smith. After going through a divorce, my sister passing away, experiencing narcissistic abuse, and some significant health scares, I realized through sharing my story that I wasn't alone in my suffering. Suffering, subjective distress generated by the experience of being out of balance. In a deep dive to holistically heal mind, body, and soul is where I discovered peace, clarity, and connection. It is impossible to be truly wise without some real-life hardship, and we cannot develop post-traumatic wisdom without making it through, and most importantly, through it together. Social connection builds resilience, and resilience helps create post-traumatic wisdom, and that wisdom leads to hope. Hope for you and others witnessing and participating in your healing, and hope for your community. A healthy community is a healing community, and a healing community is full of hope because it has seen its own people weather, survive, and thrive. Rozella Haydée White, known as the Love Big Coach, is a social impact entrepreneur focusing on nurturing, life-giving, justice-seeking love. She is a public theologian, spiritual coach, speaker, and writer embodying bold, intentional, and generous love. CEO of RHW Consulting, LLC, she envisions a world transformed by love through coaching, development, and travel experiences. She also co-founded Racial Healing and Wellness Coaching to redefine racial justice through individual healing. As an author and mental health advocate, she encourages thriving beyond survival with the focus on revolutionary relationships and healing the world. So please welcome to the show, Rozella Haydée White.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and to be in conversation with you.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and share your story and your expertise with us. You know, I don't take anyone's time or energy lightly. So I truly, truly appreciate you taking the time to co-create this experience for our listeners. Thank you.
Yeah. And I love that you even start with co-creation. That is something that is important to me and something that I talk about, right? Mm-hmm. It's not simply what I bring or what you bring or what others bring, but when we're together, right, something else becomes possible. So
absolutely. Yes. Yes. True believer in that. You know, it's interesting. When I started as an entrepreneur, I started in real estate, and everything in that industry to me felt like it was about competition, comparison, all those things. And it didn't resonate with me. It didn't align with my spirit. And being someone who is faith-based, believe in God. And I was just like, okay, we're created to create, God's children, created in his image. We're all creators. What we're doing is, like, when we come together and we connect, we're co-creating experiences like you, I, and God. So,
yes,
so I'm very big on co-creation and collaboration. Truly believe God does not run out of blessings. So, you know, I have people on here who are in the same field as me. We do the same things. We, you know, partner on things. So, you know, when I put out the call on Threads and you were one of the people that raised your hand, I actually made a post on Threads today saying how much I love that platform because I have met some phenomenal women. And in the time that I've been on Threads, I've been able to collaborate, co-create, connect with women off of that platform, and make new friends. And it's just been a beautiful experience. So,
and I love that. And I love the alliteration. So anyone who knows me knows that, right? So you're talking about collaboration and co-creation. And I think about the community, right, that we're able to. And yes, as someone who is both faith-based and used to be a minister in a progressive denomination, right, that way of being for me is also steeped in what I would think of as a theology of abundance, right? There is more than enough. So yes, it's not about competition. It's about that authentic connection and seeing where the alignment lies and resides, and then trusting that the spirit, you know, some people call it maybe the universe, but that the spirit is up to something in those connections. So absolutely, yeah, I'm on the same page.
Love it. And I even love that you put that in, like, some people call it the spirit, where it's like, I have realized over the years, being connected to people of different beliefs, different backgrounds, most times we're talking about the same thing, just using different language. And there was a time where, I was going to church twice a week, Wednesdays and Sundays, and heavily in that environment. And people started to have a problem with the language because of my coaching background, but talking about the universe, making it universal to also non-believers. But I'm like, God created the universe. So what are we talking about here?
I mean, listeners, you can't see me, but I like leaned in and was like, yes, sis, exactly that, right? Like God created it all. Like if I believe in God and the expansiveness of God, right? God has created it all. So for me, it's freeing, right? And for me, it actually, when I think about engaging folks of various belief systems or of no belief system, right? I don't have, I don't have a dog in that fight, if you will, because I do believe that all of it is under this umbrella or this banner. And I'm able to respect folks because that's where they are. And so, again, totally align with that.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So before we get to, where you are presently, I love to start the show with a bit of an icebreaker question. And because I believe, like, as kids, we have these vivid imaginations and we are able to visualize and fantasize. But as we get older, culture, society, our family, they unintentionally limit us by telling us, be realistic, or, telling us you can't do that, or that's not possible. So before the world limited your beliefs in what is possible, I would love to know, who or what you wanted to be as a little girl.
It's so funny and fascinating that you're asking this question, because recently I came across, it must have been a project where I had to do like my autobiography. It was in elementary school. And I want to say like third or fourth grade when I think about what the drawings were. And it was probably typed on a typewriter when I'm looking back at the, the way that it was put together. But essentially, there's always been two things that have come up for me when I think about what I wanted to be or do. One was to be a sex therapist. I don't know where that came from. And, my dad would say, I used to read these romance books growing up. And he's like, I'm pretty sure that's where that came from. But at some point, I was like, I want to be a therapist. And when I got older, I was like, oh, I want to be a sex therapist. Like, I want to help people connect in that way.
Yeah.
And then the other was that I always knew that I wanted to be someone who traveled and who connected with people around the world. Didn't know what that meant or what that would be. But those are like the vivid images that come up for me, right? To be in a helping profession and to be someone who travels and connects. And it's ironic because I actually do those things now. I'm not a therapist, but I'm a coach. And I was at one point in my journey training to be a therapist, was on the road to get my PhD. And then life happened as it does. And in that interim time between figuring out what I had planned and what was new, I really explored coaching, and that felt like the right fit. And I do travel and I do have work around the world. And so I'm able to kind of marry both of those things in a beautiful way now. But I love inviting people to go back to like, what was that initial thought or those initial dreams that we had before life kind of interrupted us.
Right. I love that. And I love how you've connected that to who you are today and what you do today. It's always interesting for me to hear what or who someone wanted to be as a child versus how that is connected to who they ended up becoming. If they allowed things to shift them or if they found a way to incorporate that. So I love it. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So like, what's your earliest childhood memory that defines who you are today?
Oh, earliest childhood memory that defines who I am today. I would say one that comes to mind is I've always been a little bossy, and my mother is an educator. I say is, she's technically retired, but I feel like anyone who knows anything about educators, especially lifelong ones, that they never retire from education. But I remember in the summers, right, my younger brother, who's 6 years younger than me, I would have him do school with me after school was out. And this would be after the school year had ended, and I would be setting up our desk and our tables, and he'd have his progress report that I would give my mom every day when she got home. And I was just really bossy, but I was also very like, this is what you have to learn and this is what you have to do. And so that's one of my earliest childhood memories of me like embodying a particular way of being that still is a part of who I am now. I say not a bossy, but a boss. Yeah, that's the one that comes to mind right now.
Okay. So I'm thinking about, what we talked about earlier of, just the language or the labels that people use for things. And I'm like, bossy versus leader. Like, even as kids, I think it was yesterday I interviewed someone on the podcast. We were just talking about as kids, the labels that were given as kids, and parents or teachers, the labels that, they say you're too talkative, you are too bossy. Those labels that we hold on to that kind of shape who we become. But if you flip it and you actually look at it from a different perspective, like, a child who was labeled as too talkative, well, that child knows how to communicate and express themselves, and use their voice. So I'm just wondering, like, hey, bossy, maybe you've just always had the leadership skills or, all of those things. So it's like, there's so many labels, especially as kids, that we're given that make us have this negative perspective of a thing. But as we evolve, we can see how those things can be actually positives and not necessarily as negative as we were programmed to believe.
Absolutely. And I think that there's 2 or 3 things that come up for me with that. One is I've always been a leader, right? And always had those qualities, those characteristics, was tapped as a young person to lead, whether it was in my church or locally in civic engagements. I was a cheerleader, like from middle school to high school, right? So that was always a part of it. The only 2 things I got in trouble for as a kid were talking too much, like I was a talker, and reading in class when I felt like the teacher was either going too slow or I'd already done the work. And it's fascinating to me now because, again, I look to where I am now and I'm a public speaker, right? So I definitely use the gift of gab. And I'm a writer, right? I still read, but I love words. And so those do give us clues. And I often tell people, if you want to know the truth of who you are, go back to the beginning of your story, right? Before, whether it's trauma or pain entered in, or to your point, exactly that, right? What were the things that were said about you that can be flipped? And from the faith perspective, I always remind people, that the power of life and death resides in the tongue. It resides in what we say to folks. So how, when we're looking at our young people today, right? I live in a multi-generational home. My family lives together. It's my parents down to my youngest niece. So it's from 8 to 68, right? And with the 3 kids, we have 2 teenagers and 1 8-year-old who thinks she's a teenager. There are things with the 3 kids, right? There are things that happen, and I'm always inviting the adults in the house to remember what we say. And, the little one, I don't want for her natural gifts to be so tampered or dampened that she doesn't see the power in them later, even as we're like, there's a time and a place. And, as her aunt, I'm the one that's like, okay, there's a time and a place. Just because you see things, I mean, you have to say everything, but that means that you're observant. Right. And so how do we help, whether it's young people or whomever, have a different relationship with things that we might have baggage about and might call out in a way that may not be life-giving. And so I'm always mindful of that because I'm an example of that, right? I was the girl who talked too much. I was the girl who was bossy. I was the girl who, was reading and was kind of in these other worlds when the outside world became too much. So that's important to me as well.
Yes. There's 2 things that you said there that I wanted to highlight. As kids, there's even that nursery rhyme, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. That is untrue. Right. Words have power. Words can be hurtful. Words can destroy, and words can uplift and build. I think words are so powerful. So not only do we need to be mindful of what we say to kids, because that seeps into their subconscious and their belief system and their paradigms and what they carry on going forward, but also as adults, how we interact with each other, the words that we use with each other. My kids are grown, 18, 22, and 26, but I am very mindful now of the words that I use towards them, because they are in that stage where I was trying to figure out my identity myself, right? And the words that are spoken to you, you start to hear those words in your head and play them over and over again, and until you start to believe them. So it's like being mindful, like even the things that, like for example, my middle daughter, she was diagnosed with ADHD when she was younger, but I've always called her my challenger child. Instead of saying, she's the troublemaker, or she's this, or she's that, she's my challenger child. She, not only does she challenge me, but she challenges other people, their beliefs. She is not about, going with the flow of things. Like, she's like, I don't want to do that. Why do we have to do that? Why does it need to be that way? Why do I need to wear this to church? Who said? Who made
You're right. Right.
Right.
And that just means like she's curious and she wants to know, right, how we got to that outcome, or why that request is important.
Yes.
But I don't know about you, depending on how we were raised, the challenging and the questioning was not something that was okay.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. And I mean, that's a whole other topic that we could go into, because I try to raise my children to be individuals with their own views and perspectives. They're not forced to believe what I believe or go on a path that I've chosen for them, because although I birthed them, they are God's children, and what maybe He had a different vision for them from what I may have for them. So as long as they are respectful about it, they are allowed to speak their mind. And sometimes I'm just like, oh, why did I let this happen? But at the same time, right, they are who they are. But that also speaks to your point of when you talked about, as adults, us imposing our beliefs that may not be helpful to the younger generation, where we, because of our experiences, because of our hurts and traumas, how we impose our fears or we impose our limitations on them based on what we say to them. So we definitely have to be mindful of that as well.
All of that. And it's interesting because we're in an intergenerational home, and my brother and I, right, who were raised by our parents, we decided when he had his oldest two. So he has two older kids, one who is graduating in a couple of weeks, an 18-year-old, and my niece, Brooklyn. So Jaden is 18, Brooklyn is 17. And I knew after he had them, right, because he was 18, 19 himself, that at some point I would be home to help support him, because there's a lot with a variety of things in their lives. And we had decided early on that we were going to be different than our parents were, right? We were going to keep some of the things that we knew were important, but in terms of the opening questions, giving them space, right? Asking, how they're feeling in a particular way. And it's interesting because my mom and dad are here and they see us with them and they're like, this is very different. This is very different. But I've also seen how my parents have started to embrace some of that in their own, as they're grandparents now. And I always say grandparents are different than the parents were. And I think you might be a grandma.
I'm a grandma.
Yeah. I wonder how your kids feel about that. Because sometimes we're like, wait a minute, this was not how you were. But it's been a real blessing to be able to explore, right, these different ways of being, and also for our parents to show where they're open to it, but also to your point, those moments when we're like, yeah, this is only coming up because we didn't do this or we didn't say this in this way. And I like to think that the more we learn, and we try different ways of being and relating to each other, right, that it's a gift to the next generation. So we'll find out. We'll find out.
Okay, so I would love to know, what did you learn about emotions growing up, and how has it helped you and how has it hurt you?
So the other thing that I would say, in addition to being kind of the bossy leader person with words, is that I'm also incredibly sensitive. I've always been a child whose emotions run very close to the surface, and in later years, was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and kind of learned how to manage all of that. But when I was younger, and my mom and I have talked about this, my mom would sometimes say to me, like, I have no idea how to deal with this, because my mom is not as emotive as I am. She is a very emotional person as well. She has emotions, but the way that she expresses them is very different from me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I was a crier. I'm a deep feeler. I mean, we talk about being empaths now, right? I know that I'm deeply intuitive. So it's not always the things that I'm experiencing, but it's what is happening around me.
Mm-hmm.
And while for the most part, I had a fairly stable childhood, there were some things that happened that were traumatic, right? And those things did impact how I related to myself. So my father that I live with now, or that's in my life now, my biological dad, was not a part of my life until I was about 13 years old.
Mm.
And prior to that, my mother had met and married my stepfather, right? So my mom and my dad had me. They separated when I was a baby. Around 3 years old, she met my stepfather, who was my brother's father, my younger brother's father. They married, had my brother, and then we all left New York and came to Texas. And then they divorced when I was about 13 years old. And then my
Mm-hmm.
mom and my biological dad got back together and got married.
I love
So
that.
there's like all of these stories that are wrapped in there, right? My parents, like my biological parents' story, which is a fascinating love story that at some point I hope we get to write about. But, as a 13-year-old child, it was not that, right? It was, here is the man that had raised me and my stepfather. And now he's no longer a part of my life, even though he's a part of my brother's life, because I wasn't really a part of the separation agreement. And now my dad is coming back into the picture. And again, this is all stuff that we've all talked about publicly. And my dad wasn't present he has 4 children. I'm the youngest of his 4 kids. He wasn't really present as a father figure in any of his kids' lives. So him coming down when I was 13 and 14 was a difficult time for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've recognized that things like that definitely impacted, right, how I view not only myself, my worth, but also my relationship to the male figures in my life. And so growing up, I was very emotional. And I think the message that I got was that, not to wear my feelings on my sleeve, right? That not to cry about everything, or the don't cry or don't express this, because it's not appropriate for a kid to express things like anger or frustration. Right. I can remember like trying to get huffy, and then that was not a thing that was allowed. And so, for me, my books and, my writing became kind of an outlet for that, for me to be able to express those emotions. And again, fast forward to now, right? So much of who I am, and even the brand that I've built, I'm called the Love Big Coach. And my first book is Love Big, The Power of Revolutionary Relationships to Heal the World. It's really about me embracing this love that was implanted in me from the very beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
This depth of emotion and feeling. And I talk about love not just being a sentiment, but being a force for good, for change, for justice. But alongside love comes vulnerability. And those are things that I consider to be my superpower, even though when I was younger, they were things that were like, nah, it's too much. It's too much. Right. So I've been on this journey of, and I would say it's probably been over the last 20 years, but really over the last 5 years of really reclaiming, right, the emotional side of myself. And for anyone who is an astrology person listening in, I'm a Cancer rising with a Pisces moon. So I'm all water. Like, I'm very emotional, and I embrace it.
Yeah. I can completely relate to all of the things that you said about emotion, where, you're an emotional child and the adults can't handle it because they've been taught to suppress their emotions. So us having these extra emotions, they're like, no, tuck that in, hold that. But now as adults, being able to embrace all of it. And, you talked about being an empath, being intuitive, being, in touch with your emotions, all these things. It makes me curious. Like, I'm wondering if you're also an HSP, highly sensitive person. Because that in itself also comes with amazing gifts that as kids or younger people, we didn't understand how to navigate.
Yes. I'm sitting here smiling, listeners, because this morning when I went to go check in on my dad is on disability and has pulmonary disease. So again, I just check in on him, before this, and I started crying just because I was feeling something. And it's interesting because, my family knows that me crying does not necessarily mean anything's wrong. It's the emotional expression of that. And so I was going to say, well, I've never done like a test or anything about it being an HSP. But then I just had this thought that if my dad were to ask that, if anyone were to ask him, is your daughter a highly sensitive person? He'd be like, yeah. And again, it's not just I am, but like the weight of the world.
Yeah.
And because of the work that I did, especially in my first career in a ministry environment, I was a part of a national denomination. I was a national leader. I did work across the world. I have, deep love in the Holy Land for a variety of reasons. Stuff happens globally and I feel it.
Yeah.
And I literally don't know how people are able to compartmentalize. Like I'm tearing up right now. Like I don't know how people are able to compartmentalize. Like it. And so sometimes I wonder if people realize that there are folks like us that it requires extra levels of awareness and care of myself because the emotions are that tangible. Like I feel it. Right. And, I always go back to the Spider-Man and Uncle Ben saying, with great power comes great responsibility. And when I think about the vulnerability, when I think about the emotional connection, I've also recognized what I have to do to provide some protection for myself, right? So the spaces that I spend time.
Self-preservation.
My home is my sanctuary, right? You're not going to find me out as much anymore. I'm very particular with the people that I spend time with, not because of any type of judgment thing, but because I carry all of it. So I have to be very mindful of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, this is why I said I am grateful for the platform of Threads and being able to connect with phenomenal women because it has allowed me to attract women who are in alignment with me and women who are also empaths, women who are also HSPs, women who are also out here doing servant leadership. It's just beautiful because I'm looking at your tears and I'm like, I feel you, girl. I feel you. And I'm a crier. So usually on the show, we are both laughing and crying a lot. And I'm sitting here holding in mine and I'm like, that actually hurts physically to hold in my tears. But what you mentioned about, other people not realizing that there are people like us that are so extremely sensitive that we feel everything. It's only, so my first 40 years of life, my sensitivities were invalidated completely. And I wasn't aware that there is like a whole world of other people out there like this. So the last 4 years, even doing the HSP test, so you can Google it. There's an HSP test, the author of the book and all that studying. She has the test online and I believe there's like, I don't know, 27 or 28 questions, something like that. Okay. And I am like a 26 out of 27. Like it's very high.
Okay.
So, I've had to read a lot of books about HSP, how to function in the world, with, especially right now with so much chaos. But the beautiful gifts that come with being in HSP where, people don't understand the abundance and depth of empathy that HSPs have, the abundance of creativity that HSPs have, the sensory intelligence of people with HSP, the depth of processing and the depth of emotion. So when you talked about, tearing up, just going and seeing and checking on your dad, we feel other people's emotions to a point where the average person wouldn't understand. So oftentimes you may get into a mood or feel an emotion that is not yours. And I've had to learn to ask myself, is this mine? Where is this coming from? Because sometimes you get either a wave of sadness or depression, or if you're around certain people. So the self-preservation is highly, highly, highly important. And I feel you where it's like now you don't go out as much, you don't go to certain environments, where I have had to learn to say no to a lot of in-person things, whether it be connecting with family, friends, events, you name it, because I am a sponge for energy. And I go into a space and it can completely like debilitate me where I can't function for a week after that. I can be around people that I love, but because they're in such a depressed state and they may not be vocalizing it, but their energy exhausts me for days. So it's very important, that self-preservation piece. And like you said, it's not that you don't love, those people. It's in order for you to be able to function and thrive, self-care, self-love, you have to prioritize that self-preservation piece.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And because I do live with mental illness, right? Like, it's not just like, oh, I'll feel what they're feeling and I'll bounce back. I'll feel what they're feeling and it triggers me.
Yes.
And if I'm not also taking care of myself, or if it's a busy time, right? Like, I feel like sometimes things go off the rails when I'm traveling, and then I have this thing that I'm working with this client, and I'm on this writing and I'm not home. And then before I realize it, like, my energy is depleted. And if my energy is depleted, I'm not doing the things that help restore and replenish or protect me. And then I encounter something, and then the train is off the tracks. Like,
yeah.
So it has been a learning. And I don't know about you, but there's something after 40 where I care a lot less about what people think about. I mean, my friends know, like, yeah, I'll go out and you better get me once, because it'll be okay once, and then another 6 weeks. And then,
Yeah.
So the people in my life know, and have been very both accommodating and supportive.
Yes. Yes. So I would love to know how you're embracing the depression and anxiety, because so I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety in 2006. And at the time I was in a very toxic marriage, but I was like, I am not accepting this diagnosis. I'm going to just do what I need to do. And part of me being a transformational mindset coach now, I'm very intentional about the words that I use, the environments that I'm in, because I'm heavily affected also as an HSP. So I know that it's a challenge. So I would love if you could share for the listeners, how you've been embracing your diagnosis and functioning in the world.
Absolutely. Well, let me see, I was formally diagnosed probably in 2007, 2008. And to that moment, there had been 2 depressive episodes that I look back on and was like, that's exactly what that was. I mean, so much so I failed out of college. And this is someone who I graduated top of my high school class, went to Spelman to start, all the things, right? A high achiever. Ended up coming home after my freshman year to work. And then my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer and everything changed, right? But by the 3rd year of college, when I was at Texas A&M University, I found out that year. It was 2001. And it would probably go on to be 6 months. That included, right, that year before I failed out, and then a year after, of me being depressed and not knowing at the point what exactly it was. But everyone kind of being like, this is not, like, what is this? And so I wouldn't be diagnosed until I was in grad school. And then I wouldn't start medication probably until 2011. And that was right after my 3rd major depressive episode. And so I've been someone who has been on medication since then. There have been different changes and shifts. There was a season where I tried to go off of it. And I say tried, like, I went off of it and I did it in the appropriate way. And I also recognized, oh, no, this is important for me, right? I know everyone feels differently and body chemistries are different. But in terms of me having a baseline, and I talk about it as like the fog rolling in and rolling out. And once I found a medication that was right for me and was in alignment with my body chemistry, it it was like, oh, it keeps the fog at bay. Like, this is what it's like to not have that oppressive weight, right, over me. And it's an interesting thing to reflect on because I was able to do things without meds, but I realized my quality of life got better when I was able to have like a holistic approach to my care. So that it looked like therapy, that looked like meditation, that looked like medication, that looked like, moving my body, that looked like at certain seasons, changing how I ate. But for me, meds have been a constant, and I'm okay with that. And in 2011, 2012, I started my blog, which was called Embracing My Shadow. And the title came from, Debbie Ford at that point. This was before she died and gotten sick. She talked a lot about shadow work. And one of the things that I loved about that, right, was that it didn't demonize these parts of ourselves. It didn't talk about it in terms of darkness or blackness and what's bad, but it talked about, I understood, okay, shadow is something that's always with us, right? It just depends on kind of where the light is, whether we can see it or not, but the shadow is always there. And for me, that became the metaphor for how I thought about my depression, right? That it's always with me. And there are moments in life when the shadow becomes more visible because of any number of things. But embracing it looked like A, not fighting, but this was a part of my reality. B, leaning in to what I was feeling, right? And so there would be seasons in my life where it'd be like, well, no, I'm not depressed. I'm just going to fight and fight, and it's like I'd go through these things and I would end up causing harm to myself, and or the time that I was in that episode would be longer because I wouldn't actually just listen to what my body needed, right? And be present to it. So much of when I think about thriving with mental illness, right, it's embracing it. It's getting this appropriate support for you because for all of us, it's different. And it's leaning in instead of ignoring or pulling back.
Yeah.
And so now, when I do experience, I think what I would consider to be a depressive episode or something, it's much shorter in time, right? Whereas before it would be 6 months, a year. Now it's like maybe a couple of weeks, right? And I've learned to be mindful of what is being revealed to me in those moments, right? Because I do think there are some things that we can only experience in the dark or when we're not able to see some other things. So that's part of it. And I think it's also just not being ashamed to continue to push back against the shame and stigma, especially as a Black woman, especially, coming from the cultures and households. I mean, I'm Afro-Caribbean on my mom's side. We got the Jamaican and the Puerto Rican over there. And so the mental health, what? And then on my dad's side, right? I mean, traditional Black American. So out of enslavement, right? Like we can trace it back. My grandmother on my dad's side was the granddaughter of sharecroppers who were one generation removed from chattel slavery. And then when I look at my family, I'm like, oh, on my dad's side, right? Drug addiction and substance abuse runs rampant. Well, guess what? That is part of the trauma. And you really don't see addiction separate and apart from mental illness, right? That becomes the coping mechanism. So for me, that was important to recognize. Okay, substance abuse and whatever substance it is, for me, it could be food, right? Like actually is a way of numbing and or dealing. But what are the different ways of dealing and embracing that are not as harmful? And I always give the caveat, right? I say this with the understanding that there is something different when we're in the throes of a depressive episode or in a mental illness crisis. And that requires a particular level of support, especially if we're suicidal or if there have been attempts or ideation, right? That's a very different conversation. We don't meditate that away, right? That requires a different type of care. And once I have been out of that kind of danger zone, right, this is what I'm talking about in that space. And I've been in that danger zone and that required psychiatric outpatient support, right? Whereas now there's a different way of engaging it.
There's so many things you said there that I want to highlight that I'm like, okay, sometime we don't have all that time, but one thing, so I want to start with, I love that you have a holistic approach to your healing and embracing all of that, because I have seen and heard people that, especially in the faith-based industry, where they're like, oh, just pray it away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like they don't believe in therapy, they don't believe in the medication, their paradigm around those things is closed off, and then they are praying to their blue in the face and things are not working, and they're like, what's going on, God? So I love that you have the holistic approach. I am all about the holistic approach. I love when women come on here, especially women who are pastors or have been leaders in the church, where they openly speak about adding in therapy
Mm-hmm.
and medication.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do what works for us,
Yeah.
right? I know a woman who is very, very heavily into the church, and when she was diagnosed with something, basically didn't want to take the medication because she's like, this is, against what we're doing here. But it's like, if it is going to help you, if it is going to make life better for you, if it is going to make your environment better, if it's going to make your relationships better, like, you got to do what's best for you, right?
Right.
I feel like we're sabotaging ourselves when we are closed off to the things that are helpful for us and those that love us. So I wanted to definitely highlight the holistic approach that you have. And then I wanted to speak to, you're talking about the awareness of it and basically leaning into it. I think that that's important. For one, for us to be aware of our own bodies. We're so hyper focused on what everyone else is doing and getting to know other people, but we need to get to know ourselves, right? We need to be aware of ourselves and do what is best for us and pay attention to what our body needs. Our body gives us clues. God gives us clues that we ignore. And then we're sitting there in pain saying, well, why is this happening?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is definitely something to highlight. And then lastly, I'm trying to remember the last thing you said, because there was something I wanted to say to that. Now I can't remember.
It'll come back.
Yeah, it'll come to me. But I appreciate your openness about your journey. I was going to say, right. Okay. Generational. There we go. So the generational trauma, the generational, whatever environment you're in, whatever you want to call it, the generational chains, like bondage, all those things, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to label it. I think if we pay attention to those factors, it can help us with the healing process in order for us to break those generational things. Because if we look at the history in our families, there are unhealthy patterns that they either didn't have the tools or the resources to deal with that we now have. And yes, it is uncomfortable. Yes, it is hard. Yes, it is challenging. No, it doesn't feel good. But if we take the action and we are intentionally healing those things, then we're protecting the next generation. We're saving them from the pain, the trauma, and the hurt. So it's definitely challenging being the, I guess, generational trauma breaker, because I am one of them. So especially as someone who is an empath, who is, in tune with your emotions, aligned with God, and an HSP, there's so much feelings. So much feeling.
All the feelings. And then depending on the type of faith background you came from, right? I'm from a more progressive one. So what I'm about to say was not a part of my lived experience. But when I got older and was working in some other ones that maybe were more conservative, right? There are faith traditions that would actually demonize your feelings, right? Don't trust your heart, or the ways of the heart of wicked, right? Like there are things that people would say. So if you had those things, that could be an added traumatizing experience. And religious trauma is something that I work with now with clients, because there are things that I think communities of faith and leaders of faith have, I would say, wrongly,
yes,
communicated and or or shared that then adds, right, this burden. So now I'm a deeply feeling person, and now I'm told you can't trust your feelings. So now I'm going to be disembodied from my feelings, and oh, wait, I need to just pray all these things away, and my prayer is not working. So something must be wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's something I can go there if I need to, but I'm not someone who's like a fighter by nature. But when it comes to things like that, I get really angry because now we're separating people from the original and inherent divine, right? That's in them, because I do believe that we're all made in the image of God. Back to where we started, God created us to be co-creators, right? God did not create us as puppets. God created us to explore and to have choice and to have the depth of feeling to begin with. And so some of the work that I do is about helping folks reframe, right, that connection, deconstruct, dismantle, disentangle that connection so that they're able to have a more life-giving and life-affirming relationship with the divine. Because that's really important. It's really important.
I think we could have an entire episode talking about spiritual abuse, church hurt, spiritual trauma, all of those things. Like, I definitely think that is needed as an episode, because in my 44 years of life, I think there was probably about 15 years where I was going to say religiously going to the same church twice a week. And when I stopped, I guess it was more so because of the pandemic, but taking a step back and actually questioning things, where it's like, I was programmed. You go to church, you believe what the pastor says, and, you do what you're told.
Yep.
The obedient. But now intentionally questioning, because realizing that there are pastors that are literally abusing people from the pulpit with their words, or fighting from the pulpit because they have a platform or a stage, or, they have their own demons that they're fighting with. So learning to question things. And I was at a intimate event last week, and there was a minister and a prophet there, and both women were openly talking about how we've been wrongly programmed by some things that we have learned in the church, and how we should be open to reframing a lot of those unhealthy thought patterns and beliefs. So yeah, we could definitely have it a whole entire episode.
Oh yeah. For sure. Well, and I was going to say when I was thinking about the generation piece, like I always think about Adrienne Maree Brown and what she and others say and talk about around the time, right, that things live in us. So the healing work we're doing, right, is for 7 generations previous to us and 7 generations ahead of us. Right. And so I always think about all of this in the context of the long line of time. Right. And so my work in this particular season, with the gifts, experience, knowledge, access to information that I have, right, is going to impact the future, but is also kind of bringing to bear those past, right? That's in me. And so much of this work, right, is not just about today. It's about what we're doing for the future and what we're doing for the legacies that we want to leave behind. And that's important to me.
Yes. Listen, speaking my language. Speaking my language. Thank you so much. Okay. So before we go to the final segment, because we could talk for hours, I would love if you could tell the listeners where they could stay connected with you, where they can learn more from you and about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Love Big Coach, and that is my handle across platforms. So anywhere that you go, that's where I'll be. And it's just Love Big Coach, all one word. And I am someone who is committed to nurturing life-giving and justice-seeking love in this world so all can thrive. And I define love as a force that is creative, that is liberative, and that provides healing. For us all. It's not just about the individual, it's about the collective. For those of us who are church folks or religious folks, it's very Trinitarian in nature, the way that I think about it, right? God is love, God is creator, God is liberator, and God is healer. And so that's the love that I choose to embody and want to share with folks. the way that that plays out is that I have two businesses. So one is RHW Consulting, which contains the My Love Big Coach brand, which is my one-on-one coaching, group coaching, my writing and speaking. And it also is the umbrella organization for the Waymaker Agency. So I work specifically with nonprofits and NGOs, executives in those fields as well, who are navigating complex situations, right? So with Waymaker, we are helping people find a way when there seems to be no way. So creating paths out of the chaos. And so our goal there is really about how does a love ethic look like in leadership, and the work that we do is around aligning a nonprofit or NGO's intention and their infrastructure so they have the deepest impact. I also have a business called Racial Healing and Wellness Coaching with my business partner, Nicole Newman. And we decided a few years ago, we've been in a relationship for over a decade, but a few years ago, we were like, both of us, she's an organizer by training. I'm coming out of the nonprofit space, but also did a lot of work in justice and DEI before DEI was called DEI. And we were like, we know that we have something that we want to offer to the racial healing or racial justice space. And we're trying to figure out what it was. And what emerged was our coaching cohort for women. So we work with women leaders, white women, Black women, and non-Black women of color. And we invite them into a year-long community with other women. So each cohort has 15 women, and these are divided according to their background. So we have a white women's cohort, a Black women's cohort, and a non-Black women of color's cohort. And they have their own program for over a year. And what we do in that is we're combining, right, embodiment, spirituality, justice, ancestral background lineages for women to build not only in their community with each other, but in their commitment to be justice seekers. And we say that each of those groups need something different, right? White women need accountability. Black women need refuge. And then non-Black women of color, we look at building solidarity. So we have a specific program for each of those groups and all of that. So that's what I do in the world. I write and and there's always something new coming. So again, Love Big Coach is where you can find me.
I love it. I love it. I will have your socials and your website links in the detailed section of the episode so they can just click and connect with you directly. You're welcome. You're welcome. So the final segment of the show, it's kind of like a rapid fire. You share the first thing that comes to mind, whether that's one word or one sentence, but I am also not about confining anyone. So if you feel the need to expand, you're more than welcome to do so. Okay. Question number 1. What is your most repeated thought in a day?
Oh, gosh. How honest am I supposed to be? I'm going to be very honest. Honestly, the most repeated thought is, am I doing enough?
Wow. I say wow because that's been the common answer lately.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Question number 2. What would the little version of Rozella be proud of you for?
I think she would be proud of me being my own boss. Like she would be very proud that we took a risk and that we didn't let external opinion, because that used to matter so much, right? Stop us. And that I never gave up on love, even though that's a whole other conversation, but that I've remained open in the midst of all the things.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So what would she wish that you got back into?
Oh, dance. I haven't danced in a while. And it's funny because I've been scrolling. I'm looking for an adult dance class here in Houston because I miss it.
I love it. Okay. Okay. Name a book that has changed or greatly impacted your life.
Oh, there's so many. This is not a fair question for those of us who are bibliophiles. So I'm going to say a couple or a few. So Bell Hooks, All About Love, absolutely, is one that I ground so much of my work out of, or her compendium of those books. One of my favorite memoirists is Rima Zaman, and her book I Am Yours has stuck with me because it's a story of her life, but love is a main character. 7 Days in June by Tia Williams as my kind of fiction Black love story. Just loved it. about love lost and love found. And then the other book that's coming up, and it's interesting because I need to go back and read it again. But it was beautiful. It was When Breath Becomes Air, about the surgeon. He was a brain surgeon, who ended up being diagnosed. I think it was with brain cancer. So he was writing his book as he was in that final stage of life. And
Wow.
just one of the most beautiful books I've read.
Wow. Well, I will add those to my reading list. I have a very long reading list on Goodreads because I think I read about 24 books a year. So you just
Yeah.
add
I need to go follow me then. And I'm looking here because this is my bookshelves are over here, and then it's a thing.
Okay. When and where are you the happiest?
It's funny. There are two things that come up with my family. I mean, I just love being around my family. And when I'm on a beach somewhere with nothing to do, which I have not had that in a while, so I'm really looking at how that's going to happen soon.
Yes. Yeah. Listen, you need to. I've done that twice in the last, I want to say almost 6 months, because I'm like, I need it.
And I haven't done it this year. So I'm looking at the week of Memorial Day after graduation. I think I might just go away for a few days.
Good. Okay. Last but not least, what do you wish women would do more of?
Oh, just love yourselves. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm a cursor, so I won't curse here, but I'll just say F what everybody else thinks. Like, it doesn't matter. It does not matter what other people think about you. And to like love yourselves like it's nobody else's business, because it's not. And I've started to realize in my own therapeutic journey and healing from codependency and all these other things that it's nobody else's responsibility to love me but mine. Right. And everything else is an added bonus, right? The love from family and friends and partners and all of that. But, to be able to love myself big, and I talk about big being boldly, intentionally, and generously, there's nothing like it.
Love it. Thank you so much, Rozella, for sharing your story, your expertise, again, for co-creating this experience for the listeners. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. This was an absolute joy.
Thank you. And to all you healers out there, until next time, make sure you rate the show, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We want to hear any aha moments that you had from hearing Rozella's story, any gems that you picked up, what takeaways you have. We would love to hear them. You can screenshot this week's episode and write those aha moments or your takeaways, and you can tag us on Instagram. You can tag Rozella at Love Big Coach. You can tag myself at The Real McKinney Smith. And I want to thank each and every one of you that continues to listen each week to help the show rank globally in the top 1.5% of most popular podcasts. And there's over 3 million out there, so that is still mind-blowing to me. But
congratulations. That's awesome.
A healthy community is a healing community, and a healing community is full of hope because it has seen its own people weather, survive, and thrive. So let's continue to heal her.